And joining us now, Suzanne Stewart. She is the Special Advisor on Aboriginal Education to the Dean at OISE, the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education, and we're happy to have you in that chair.
Thank you.
I want to know more about this study you're doing, transition from teens to 30s of Aboriginal youth in this country. What's the study focusing on in particular?
So I've been doing a couple of different studies over the last 5 years, and I've been looking at how our young people do in the education system, as well as how they do in transitioning from education to work life, career, employment, that sort of thing.
What are you finding?
Well, what I'm finding is there are a number of barriers and challenges that our Aboriginal young people are facing, both in school and in the workplace, and these are very similar in both places. They have to do with systemic oppression and racism, cultural identity, transitions from geographical transitions that young people have to make, say from rural, remote, reserved communities into the city where they have access to higher education, college, sometimes secondary school, jobs and work and that sort of thing.
You focus on both on and off reserve Aboriginal Canadians?
That's right. I've been involved in some studies that look at both rural and reserve Aboriginal youth experiences and urban youth.
I cannot imagine living, 400 kilometers west of James Bay and then the next day finding myself on a downtown Toronto campus with 50,000 other people. How do they do that?
Well, I think it's a bit of a culture shock.
A bit?
And
Yeah.
what the young people that I've worked with in these research projects have really talked about is missing that sense of belonging, of acceptance, and of support from their family, their community, from important people in their lives. That's missing. And often that's what universities and colleges try to provide, a support system for young people, both socially, emotionally, academically. But what Aboriginal youth are finding is that this support really doesn't exist within colleges and universities to the extent that it does for non-Aboriginal students.
I guess it really is ironic that they feel so remote, given that they will never have been in a circumstance where they're surrounded by more people, right? They're moving, in some cases, into the most densely parts of the country, and yet feeling very alone. How do you get around that?
Well, universities and colleges have tried to set up specific support services for young people. So cultural support, mentors, peer support programs. And these have had some success, but the reality is that these supports are not large enough or wide enough. They don't have the breadth and depth that are really required. They're often underfunded. They may not run to term. They may not have the support from the infrastructure of the institution to make those readily available to students.
You mentioned racism in the midst of that first answer. And, this is a country that likes to think of itself as being colorblind and not racist. So what are you talking about?
Well, as far as the Aboriginal history of Canada is concerned and the experiences of many Aboriginal people in Canada, myself included, Canada is actually a very racist place with a very dark history of racism and oppression towards our people. I mean, I can only speak about that from my research and my own experience.
Residential schools, obviously, we're talking, but what else?
Well, there's residential school. There's also identity issues. The federal government making decisions about the identity of Aboriginal people.
So colonial attitudes, that kind of thing?
Colonial attitude. Well, I'm talking more systemically, in terms of defining who is a status Indian and who isn't, who belongs to particular communities and who doesn't. The federal government makes decisions like that at the legal level. There's also a lot of racism towards, what the identity is socially of an Aboriginal person. And these are often either derogatory or romanticized, sort of one or the other.
Do you know what, though, Suzanne? I keep being told that this is a problem that's going away because young people today, they don't care if you're gay or straight, or if you're from Pakistan, or if you're from Lower Slobovia. They're not the way people were 50 years ago. Is that not your experience?
No, that's not my experience at all. I've sat in graduate level classrooms where other graduate level students and professors have asked me to stop using the term First Nation because we are not the first people here. We are simply immigrants. from other parts of the world, just like they are people who came here in this generation.
Hang on. A professor told you not to use the expression First Nations.
That's right.
You want to out him or her?
No.
What university was it at?
No.
Really? You know what is it? But that happened.
You know, yes, and I have students who come with similar experiences. In my research, I've had many participants who've talked about very, very discriminatory and racist comments that have been made to them, both by professors and other students within the higher education system.
Well, let's define racist, because, you know, if you're black in the United States, we know, you know, you want to call somebody a bad name, we know what word they use. Well, what's a racist expression here?
Well, I don't think we need to go throwing sticks and stones to make it clear and understandable that Aboriginal people that I've interviewed and that I've worked with, including myself and my own children, in fact, have all experienced racist slurs. And those are the sort of things that are very overt and easy to understand, because it's easy to make sense as racist slurs and comments being part of someone else's issues. You know, that really shows where a certain person who may be making comments like that is in their own healing journey, when they feel like they need to lash out at other people on any basis, whether it's race, culture, socioeconomic status, sexual orientation, whatever. That's really about that person, and that's easy to understand and make sense of in a certain way. What's more difficult to make sense of is the systemic racism that people experience through the education system, through employment. So, for example, a good example of systemic racism would be that being in a classroom, say, and there is an Aboriginal student in a classroom in, say, university, and they are expected to be the spokesperson or the scapegoat for all Aboriginal issues within the classroom, which makes it both academically and personally unsafe for them.
In a way that no other person would be expected to represent their community, quote unquote. Okay.
That's right.
Okay, so you've studied it. What should we do about it?
Well, there's a number of different things, you know, specific solutions that have come through some of the research that I've done. And that would be, first of all, creating more supports for Aboriginal students, holistic supports. So not just having the academic support there, but having social support, emotional support, spiritual and cultural support. When we talk about education as not being holistic in an Aboriginal context and needing to be more holistic, what we're really talking about is being able to appreciate the cultural, respect and appreciate the cultural identity of the student and what that entails. And when we say holistic, what we're really talking about is the missing piece, which is the spiritual part. Indigenous people are spiritual people, and the spirit of the self and of education is often what's missing for our young people.
Are non-Indigenous people capable of providing that kind of support?
Absolutely. Providing the support that's needed to make that available.
But in terms of delivering the program itself, does that kind of a program only work? See, what I'm understanding is if you're an Aboriginal student in a big urban setting and you're far away from, let's say, a remote reserve where you used to live, does that kind of program only work if you're relating one-on-one to a fellow Aboriginal Canadian?
Well, not necessarily, because what we're really talking about now is about making human contact, right?
Okay.
And when we're not able to meet someone on an equal basis at a human level, which is what we're not doing when we're coming from stereotypes and racist ideology about what a person is, in terms of their identity, in terms of their epistemology, then we're not meeting them on a human level.
Okay. Teachers, what role can they play?
Well, teachers themselves, first of all, need to learn who Aboriginal people are and what the history of colonization is and what that impact is on education. Teachers can't teach anyone until they learn themselves.
If a teacher is teaching a 7-year-old Aboriginal Canadian, is it helpful to their being able to teach that 7-year-old to know what you just said?
Absolutely. I mean, Aboriginal people in Canada are currently dealing with education as a healing issue, not as a tool that's going to help us move forward in life, which is how most kind of non-Aboriginal people understand education. Education has been used as a tool of oppression on our people for several generations, and we're still dealing with healing from the trauma of that experience. So education is not seen as something that's safe and healthy and good. It's seen as a source of trauma.
Even by that 7-year-old?
Well, that 7-year-old may have a parent or a grandparent who went to residential school.
But the 7-year-old probably doesn't know that, do they?
But the 7-year-old comes from a system that doesn't give support for formal education because it sees formal education as a source of trauma and oppression.
Gotcha.
That's why.
So, not just teachers, but all of us have to...
So it becomes intergenerational in that way.
Right. If we were to make these changes, how long do you think it would take before Aboriginal Canadians don't feel the way you do about the kind of country in which they live?
Well, maybe I'm a little naive when it comes to change, and I think that change is something that can really happen with the turn of a head or a blink of an eye. And what it really takes is for people just to be able to see things a little bit differently, for things to begin to change.
We're open to that?
I think everyone has the capacity to be open to that. How realistic that really is yet to be seen. I mean, where I work at the University of Toronto, there have been major changes. We have a new dean at OISE, Dean Julia O'Sullivan, who is a very staunch supporter of Aboriginal education and issues, and she has really done everything that she can to use her influence to make these changes that need to be made come into real effect.
Good.
So
Suzanne,
there are people who are concerned.
you were on our program a month or so ago, and we're glad you came back to tell us all about your studies.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Suzanne Stewart, the Aboriginal Education Advisor to the Dean at OISE, Ontario Institute for Studies in Education. Thanks so much.
Thank you.